brand new episode of Law and Batting Order. I'm your host, Tony Oikostas. Here are some quick hits from the past week. The NBA Finals are underway, and this has been a very exciting matchup thus far. In Game 1, the Thunder struck down the Heat 105-94, but in Game 2, LeBron James and the Heat came in with an edge and succeeded. Players like Shane Battier, Dwayne Wade, and even LeBron came through in the clutch late in the fourth quarter as they defeated the Thunder 196. At the time this was filmed, the Heat and the Thunder will take Game 3 into Miami with a one-game tie. I am what you call a baseball buff, and I am a real sucker for no-hitters. But when a pitcher comes out and pitches a perfect game, that is even more exciting. On Wednesday, San Francisco Giants pitcher Matt Cain threw the 22nd perfect game in Major League Baseball history. What made this event even more special is that Cain is the first pitcher in San Francisco Giants history to throw a perfect game. Cain, who threw the perfect game against the Houston Astros, was a topic of intense discussion this offseason when the Giants offered him a 6-year, $127 million deal. But Cain has spoken loud and clear by not only adding this event to his pitching resume, but by also sitting second in the league in ERA and fourth in the league with 8 wins, making him a potential candidate in this year's Cy Young race. The Stanley Cup Finals have ended, and there are new kings in the sport of hockey. On Monday, the Los Angeles Kings won the Stanley Cup Finals Series 4-2, making this their first Stanley Cup win in franchise history. Game 6 was perhaps the most exciting game of this series, as the Kings scored 3 times off the Devils in the first period during the Devils' power play. Jonathan Quick was named the series MVP, but more importantly, the City of Angels is basking in the glory of this win. Today's Order in the Court will be discussing social media policies in Major League sports. Social media such as Facebook and Twitter have evolved the way we have communicated with each other. This has especially been the case in sports as athletes, leagues, and teams have used social media to interact with fans. However, various sports leagues have implemented social media policies that raise concerns about whether or not they are too restrictive. Perhaps the bigger concern is if these social media policies inhibit players' First Amendment rights. To answer this question and more, I have the privilege of interviewing Dr. Paul Levinson, who is a professor of communication and media studies at Fordham University. He was my mentor for a semester while I was at Fordham during my senior year. He is the author of many books, including The Plot to Save Socrates, New Media, and The Soft Edge. He's a musician, he's a comedian, he is a jack of all trades. Dr. Levinson, welcome to the program. How are you?
Hey, Tony, great to be here, and you actually taught me everything I know. So.
I'm glad, and I mean, for a 21-year-old, it wasn't that bad, right?
You were great. Yeah.
Well, anyway, let's get going here. Your academic studies have been focused on communications, more specifically media that are constantly evolving. You stress that idea in your book, New Media, when you talk about how newer media like Facebook and Twitter have come about and have somewhat replaced older media. How essential are new media like social media to our everyday lifestyle?
I think they become absolutely essential. And the reason is human beings inherently always want to communicate. It's as natural and essential to our lives as air and water and food. In fact, Arthur C. Clarke, the great science fiction writer, used to love citing a study which really did take place in the 1960s, has been repeated many times, which shows that people can go longer without food and water and with no ill effects on them than they can without information. If you lock someone in a sensory deprivation chamber and deprive them from all information, pretty soon they start having psychotic episodes. And you can go much longer without food and even water. Now, obviously, nobody wants to perform those kinds of experiments.
Right.
But the point is, communication is something that's intrinsic to our being human. And so when you have a social medium like Twitter or Facebook, which allows us to constantly keep in touch with people and information that we need to be in touch with, it becomes very, very basic. I'm up here on Cape Cod enjoying a month of vacation, but for me, a vacation is never just totally being away from my work because I love my work. So it seems natural to me that I would be working as well as being on vacation. And every year when we come up here and, I have to spend a few minutes and set up my computer and or even just a laptop. And, of course, I have a smartphone. But, there's always like a slight twinge that I have. If this isn't going to connect well, what will I do? Years ago, before even laptops, I used to bring up my, old desktop computer. In those days, it really did happen once in a while that I couldn't log on and sign on for a couple of days. Someone from the phone company had to come down to our cottage and make sure all the connections were correct. And so that really taught me how crucial it was to be in touch. And nowadays, that's even more the case. What smartphones have done is they enable us, wherever we may be, wherever we may go, to be in touch with everything that we want to be in touch with, all the people in the world. The other day, as I mentioned to you, I took a train into New York City. I felt like a tourist almost to do an interview with Steve Adubato on One-on-One at WNET. And, of course, I had my smartphone, and therefore I didn't feel out of touch with anything. And so, to get back to your original question, these media are essential, and they evolved for a reason. We created them for a reason, and that reason was that we wanted to be more fully in touch with the people and things that mattered to us. It wasn't good enough, say, circa 2000 or even 2002,
right,
to go back to our home or go back to our office to be in touch with someone. We wanted to do that wherever we happen to be, and that's why these media are so crucial.
Right, right. So when you think of new media, you think words, communication, and then the term free speech comes up. How does the First Amendment right of free speech apply to new media?
Well, at least to me, and unfortunately not to everyone, including, for example, Mayor Bloomberg here in New York, the First Amendment is crystal clear. I mean, it couldn't be much more obvious than Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech or the press. I mean, no law means no law. And so it doesn't matter whether you are talking in person, whether you're talking on the radio, whether you're talking through Skype, as you and I are now talking, whether you're doing it through text, which is a form of talking. It's clearly a form of either press or speech. None of that matters. The medium doesn't matter. All of those are forms of speech and press if it's made public and in some sense newsworthy. And therefore, the government has no right to in any way censor, inhibit, stop that kind of communication. The First Amendment, of course, was put into our national constitution in the 1790s. But with the passage of the 14th Amendment after the Civil War, which said that all the rights that citizens had as American citizens, states could not interfere with those rights. In other words, if something was illegal, if Congress couldn't make a law that interfered with a person's ability to speak or communicate, then neither could a state, and neither could Mayor Bloomberg, as he did during Occupy Wall Street, when he clearly interfered with the press's coverage of the events.
Right, right. So, as a communications expert, do you see any concern or controversy when you think of the correlation between newer media like Facebook and Twitter to, let's say, a constitutional right like free speech? And you were alluding to Occupy Wall Street as an example. Would you see sort of like one concern coming up with a situation like that, or are there an accumulation of other concerns or controversies that could come about?
Well, what always happens is when a new medium is introduced, there are some people who, I was going to say for some reason, but my better guess is they're not comfortable with the First Amendment and free speech in any medium. Mm-hmm. So when a new medium is introduced, it's a good time, they think, to jump in and say, well, wait a minute, maybe the First Amendment doesn't apply here. Maybe the government should regulate this. The first time that came about, that kind of argument, was early in the 20th century, and it was about radio. And people in the 1920s and 30s, some people started to say, well, you know what? Radio didn't exist when Thomas Jefferson wrote the First Amendment, when James Madison argued about how important it was. And so, therefore, the First Amendment does not apply to radio. Mm-hmm. And to some extent, the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, was allowed to be created because some people agreed with that argument. That is, that radio was exempt from the First Amendment. I don't agree with that argument. But it's happened all over again with Twitter and Facebook and everything on the web. There have been a series of attempts to control what people communicate on those new media. Back in the 1990s, before Twitter and Facebook, but you still had websites and online communication. Congress passed the Communications Decency Act, and Bill Clinton, much to my amazement and dismay, signed it into law. And actually, which just goes to show you, by the way, that Democrats and Republicans are equal opportunity abusers of the First Amendment. It's not as if it's very comfortable if you're a progressive person politically to say, well, it's all the Republicans, but the Democrats have been just as bad. And so, fortunately, the Supreme Court, in one of its rare decisions recognizing the First Amendment, struck down that act. But even the SOPA bill, the Stop Online Piracy Act, which was looming large at the end of 2011, would have allowed the government to go after, say, Twitter, if somebody had put something on Twitter that was a violation of someone else's copyright. Now, I'm a great believer in respecting copyright, but I'm not a great believer in punishing a system like Twitter, which can't possibly know what everybody has on its pages if someone violates someone else's copyright. But fortunately, that bill was never brought to fruition.
Right. So let's apply this discussion of new media to the sports world, since this is a legal-based sports show. When you see athletes creating these Facebook accounts or creating these Twitter accounts and interacting with the fans, how beneficial is it for the athlete to have such accounts? Does it in essence humanize the athlete? What's your take on it?
I think that fans have an infinite need, an infinite thirst, which can never be totally quenched, to be in touch with their heroes. And, I remember when I was a kid, wow, if I could have had any communication with Mickey Mantle, White, wow, I would have done anything. The best I could do is, all right, I got a pretty good seat in the bleachers. I'll wave to Mickey. Maybe he'll turn around and smile. So what Twitter and Facebook and social media do, and I call them new media because they're more than just online, like Amazon and iTunes. Basically, they allow the consumer to become producers, to create their own words and put them out there. And so now, for the first time, you could tweet to a famous sports figure that you followed and that you think is a great sports competitor. And I think that is a great advantage to the whole sporting event because it opens up these avenues of communication. At the same time, it does create new responsibilities. You have to be careful. Everything that you say, any place, online, and I used to mention this in my class.
Right.
If you think it's private, you might as well put it up on Times Square on those letters. And as Anthony Weiner unfortunately found out, and there was actually, I think, a college football player by the name of Yuri something. You may remember Yuri Wright, I think was his name. And he tweeted some stuff. It wasn't even that horrible. It was basically locker room talk. But when it's tweeted, it's not only seen by everyone and their grandmother, it can be seen by your grandmother and anyone and everyone in the world. And so that does carry a great additional responsibility.
Yeah. So when you mention tweeting entering the public domain, that's when the league sort of step in and sort of place these strict social media policies in an effort to protect the athletes, protect the league, protect the teams, and even protect the brand associated with these leagues. And, the four major sports leagues that have really stepped up a notch and have really, put their foot down and implemented really harsh and strong social media policies have been the National Hockey League, the National Basketball Association, the National Football League, and Major League Baseball. And I pulled up on the internet the social media policies that these leagues have implemented to protect, their best interest in the league. So over in the NHL, they basically have a social media policy in which they implemented a blackout period on the use of social media on game days, which for players begins 2 hours prior to opening face-off and is not lifted until players have finished their post-game media obligations. And the new media policy makes it clear that players and club personnel will be held responsible for their social communication in the same manner in which they are held responsible for other forms of public communication. Over in the NFL, players, coaches, and football operations personnel can use Twitter, Facebook, and other social media up to 90 minutes before kickoff and after the game following traditional media interviews. And during the games, no updates will be permitted by the individual himself or anyone representing him on his personal Twitter account or Facebook account or any other social media account. And then over in the NBA basically bans cell phones, PDAs, and other electronic devices used to access Twitter, Facebook, and other social media sites during the game. And by during the game, they mean up to 45 minutes before the opening tip and ending after the post-game locker room is open to the media, and coaches and players have first fulfilled their obligation to be available to media attending the game. And then over in Major League Baseball, they actually implemented a brand new social media policy right after their collective bargaining agreement was signed a few months ago. And basically, some of the restrictions include that players can't make what can be construed as an official club statement or league statement without permission. Players can't use copyrighted team logos or anything without permission or tweet confidential private information about teams or players and their families. Players can't link to any Major League Baseball website or platform from social media without permission. No tweets condoning or appearing to condone the use of substances on the Major League Baseball ban list. Players can't rip umpires or question their integrity. None of the tweets can contain racist, sexist, homophobic, or anti-religious content. No harassment or threats of violence, nothing sexually explicit or anything otherwise. So you have a whole slew of policies here, and you're a communications expert. Based on your first impression from reading these policies, what's your take on it? Are these really effective social media policies?
Well, first of all, a very important point to keep in mind is that the First Amendment restricts government interference with communication. Government interference either on the federal, state, or any local level. It does not, and in fact should not, interfere with private enterprises, any non-governmental group doing anything they want to, in effect, regulate communication in their realm. So whatever we may think of these limits on athletes, there's no doubt that Major League Baseball, all of the other sporting organizations have every right to say, look, if you want to be part of our organization, if you want to be a Major League Baseball player, you want to be a hockey player, whatever, you have to follow these rules. If you don't like those rules, don't be part of our organization. So I think it's important to say that because sometimes people mistakenly say, well, Major League Baseball is violating the First Amendment rights of these players. No, that's not the case at all, and it's not a First Amendment issue. That said, however, there is the issue of what kind of impression an organization wants to give to the world. And I think to overly regulate what players can say, to treat them almost like children, and MLB is the parent and the ball players are the children, is not really a good impression. And in some ways, that does more damage than any untoward communication that the players may do on Twitter and Facebook and all the other social media. What I think would be a better approach is rather than handing down a strict series of rules, you can do this, you can't do that, is more of an education. Talk to them. Players don't want to be embarrassed.
Sure.
As we were saying before, they want to use these media to get out to their fans and to become more popular and to be more loved. Mm-hmm. Last thing they want is to say stupid or controversial things. And I think if they were just taught or coached, for want of a better word, how to comport themselves on these social media and to realize that even though it seems that you're just typing, 2 o'clock in the morning on your Android or iPhone or BlackBerry, and nothing can seem more, personal and not public it seems like such a private medium, but nonetheless, that's going out to the world. So you need to be careful what you say. I think that's the best way to proceed. I think these rules, while not illegal, are too much and give the wrong impression.
Right, and you actually bring up a very crucial point, which is that there's a sense of deprivation of rights, or maybe a sense of policing that you see in these leagues. So when you weigh that and that consequence, the sense of policing that these leagues have imposed in these social media policies against these athletes, do you think then these policies that the league imposed deprive players of their right to say whatever they want on the public domain? Or do you think this is expected in this first round of policies? And, would you expect an evolution of these policies as time progresses?
Well, two things. To get to the second point first, I do think that as time evolves and society gets more comfortable with social media, the way to control things that we wouldn't want to see on social media will become much less harsh, much less obvious, and will become part of our social behavior. Just like, no one needs to tell someone, let's say you're standing online at a supermarket,
Mm-hmm.
and you get a call on your phone, and you would talk in a quiet tone of voice. No one needs to be told, don't talk, at the top of your vocal range so that everyone's eardrums are splitting. I mean, these are just like common sense things. But to your first point about the athletes being deprived of their social media rights, again, private, and by private I mean anything that's not part of the federal, state, or local government, do have the right to say, when you are part of our organization, when you come into our establishment, you have to follow our rules. And if you don't like those rules, don't come into our establishment. So, there might be a restaurant. My wife and I used to notice years ago when we first had kids that every once in a while we'd want to go to a restaurant and it would say something like, no children in the restaurant.
Right.
And you know what? So my wife and I would look at each other and say, so, hey, you know what? We're going to take our business elsewhere.
Right.
That restaurant had every right to do that. I have every right to say, hey, I'm not going to spend a penny of my money if you're going to be this hostile to kids. Grow up. Kids are part of life. But, to take that restaurant to court and say it's depriving us of our rights, no, that wouldn't have made any sense. So it's not as if the athletes are being deprived of their rights by a governmental organization. What's really going on is, if the MLB and the other rules stand, is if you want to be a ball player, if you want to play hockey, if you want to play football, basketball, whatever, you have to follow these rules. I don't think the rules make all that much sense. I think they're too much, but it's not as if anyone's being deprived of their rights.
Right, yeah. So, finally, and you addressed this previously in the previous question, where do you think sports leagues then go from here with respect to social media and whether or not they'll embrace social media? Do you think these social media policies will change as time progresses? Would you expect maybe these policies to stay intact, or probably would you expect the policies to get stricter? What's your take on that?
No, I think actually as time goes on, the rules will get softer, not stricter. I think these are the first attempt to regulate a new environment, which for many people, and you have to look at the age of who is making these rules. I mean, how old is the commissioner of baseball? I don't even know.
Oh, he's, I think, around 80. Yeah.
So there you go. God bless him. I hope he lives another 80 years.
Yeah.
But, chances are he probably doesn't know that much about Twitter, and certainly nothing about Pinterest and, Foursquare. And so he and the people around him are struggling to come to terms with something that they don't understand, that they don't really have much experience with. So they get frightened by some of these bad things that happened. And these rules are the first attempt to try to bring some order into it, or law and batting order into it. And I think as time goes on and we become more comfortable with social media, by we, I mean people of all ages, not just, people our age. I mean, actually, when it comes to social media, I'm probably as comfortable as someone who's 20, but, not everyone my age is. But as that happens, as social media disperse even more fully through the population, I think we'll see some of these rules soften.
Okay. Well, who would have thought that this would have led to such an interesting discussion, sports leagues and social media policies? But Dr. Levinson, it's always a pleasure to have you on and to talk to you. Thank you for being on Law and Batting Order.
My pleasure, anytime.
Thanks. Before I wrap up today's episode, I wanted to share 3 notes. The first is that this past week, lawandbattingorder.com underwent a redesign, and it looks awesome. The site looks far more sleek and colorful, and menus are far simpler than before. So be sure to head on over to lawandbattingorder.com to check out the new layout. The second note is that Law and Batting Order has officially been listed in the American Bar Association's blog directory. This truly is an accomplishment, as I stand alongside nearly 3,500 other successful law blogs in this directory. I'll leave a link below this video that will take you to the Law and Batting Order page in the ABA blog directory. My final note is that keeping up with the social media trend in today's episode, tomorrow, June 18th, I will be at Citi Field for Social Media Night. During the event, I will be part of a pregame Q&A with a player on the Mets. I'm not sure who the player will be, but I can assure you that I will take footage of that event alongside with footage of the sights and sounds of the ballpark that night. The video will definitely be up before Friday of this week, so be on the lookout for updates. Anyway, that's the show. Leave all your comments down below, and be sure to visit Law and Batting Order at lawandbattingorder.com, as well as on Facebook and Twitter. Until next time, have a great week, guys.